Alright, welcome. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use the very cool tools that we've made out of newspaper and other materials to make this beautiful mountain and waterfall and kind of jungly foliage scene. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make our sky our background. And to do that, we're going to lay down our dark first and then our light, just using black and white. So I'm making sort of a sky with streaks in it. You can make whatever kind of sky you want, but have some areas be darker and some be lighter. And I've kind of streaked my paint across, and then on top, I made my sky a little green using, I have a transparent fluorescent green in the brand I'm using, which is Comex, but in your brand there should be something else, or in a similar brand, usually metallics or fluorescents or semi-transparents. Molotov makes some wonderful semi-transparents. Will work great for that top coat of just sort of dusting a color across to give a tone to the sky. You can use more than one color if you want. I use just green, but you can add a little light behind the mountain or whatever you want. So to apply the paint to make my mountain, I like to use what I call a dish scrubby. It's that green thing that you probably have in your kitchen that's used to scrub pots. It makes a really great way of applying paint, especially to draw mountains and tap in foliage and stuff. So I just tear off a chunk of that green dish scrubby and dip it in some black and just draw on the top of my mountain, and then I drag it out. Since I've got the paint on the top, as I drag it out towards the bottom, it gets lighter and lighter, and that's fine because there's going to be mist down there. So now we're going to want to apply some paint to something clean, and newspaper I have ready, so I'll just use that. I lay down some newspaper, and I've got a little green and white and blue and white. Now why those colors? Well, my sky's green, so the light on my mountain is going to be kind of a greenish color, but I need a shadow color too. So I'll use a little blue for the sides which are shadow. So if you notice, I've picked the right side of my mountain to be the light side, and I've picked the left side to be the shadow side. So I'm just using a torn piece of poster board. I scoop up some of that green and just kind of lightly brush it over, using the long edge of the poster board, or sometimes moving it just to use the tiny corner, kind of being very variable, dancing around, leaving enough spaces black, and just adding in, especially along the peaks and anywhere I want it to be clear that this is the top of the mountain, I will add a little color. And I can use sort of dancing motions, lifting it up to the corner a little bit, and I can use dragging motions. See, I'm dragging the paint. I can drag thick paint, or I can drag sort of thin paint of what's left over, or I can tap if I want to create a little detail, a very sharp detail. I can just put some new paint on the edge of my torn piece of poster board and tap a little bit. And once I've got some cool light on the mountain, I might use a little transparent blue to shadow the shadow side just a little bit, to make it just even more clear that that's the shadow side. And then with some white, I can kind of fog out the base of the mountain, because that mountain's way in the distance and there's all kinds of clouds and fog in front of it. So I just add some white at the base. Now you need a white that you can control, that's a nice thin spray. Make sure whatever brand you're using, you have a white that's as controllable as this. And if you don't, either switch brands or add in a white from a different brand, because it's really essential. So now that we've got our mountain kind of foggy and in the distance, but we can still see that peak and all those beautiful textures we applied, let's use our dish scrubby to add some rocks in front where our waterfall is going to be. Now look at those nice scratchy textures. That's because the dish scrubby, that green thing used to scrub your pot, is scratchy. It's got a beautiful scratchy texture to it. It's a wonderful painting tool. And I think it has sort of a Chinese landscape painting sort of a feel. So I just kind of scratched in some black rocks there, and you can imagine just through those scratchings where a tree might go, where a hill might go. And I've added some black underneath, because we don't need a lot of detail underneath, we just need that black. And we can even add some detail, some rocks, by spraying some transparent on it and using our newspaper just to touch it here and there, drag it here and there, create a little bit of a rocky texture. Just enough so that there's a hint that there's something going on there, but not too detailed. And now it's a great time to start applying our waterfalls. So to do that, all we need is another fresh torn piece of poster board and some white paint. Now, I'm using Comex, which is a rather thin paint. You can see, since I've just sprayed it down and I'm dragging it, it's kind of thin. If I had let that sort of set up, if I sprayed a puddle of white and kind of let it set up, I would be getting much sharper waterfalls. So I can either let it set up, or I can just keep applying it and dragging it down until I like what I see. They have different feels to them. If you just let it set up, you'll get a nice sharp line. But if you use it while it's kind of thin and wet and drag it down and then just keep repeating, you can get some very transparent looking water, and then on top of that add a bright highlight. So both of those are really wonderful ways to go, but keep experimenting with the dragging carefully so that you don't keep expanding the waterfall, but until you get, some waterfalls that look pretty and you like them. Now, to finish the waterfall, up from the bottom, we take some white and spray upwards, kind of filling in the bottom part of the waterfall, the foggy part, from the bottom upwards towards the waterfall. And I've added a little bit of transparent blue on top of it so that they look a little bit more like water, and then I've just, right at the bottom, added another spray of white color. And that's really all you need to create some beautiful waterfalls, and we're ready to start with our foliage. Now somehow I got a little something stuck to my painting there, probably blew in, so I just took it off with a little palette knife, and I'm going to cover that up anyway with bushes and leaves. So the first thing we need for our foliage is we need our paint. We need shadow and we need light. So our shadow is going to be black and a little bit of blue. Our brighter colors, we've got the greens and the blues that we've already used mixed with some white. And I've got the newspaper tool that I showed you how to make in this month's other video. It's that layers of newspaper cut into a semicircle and created a fringe on the edge and kind of puffed it out with my fingers, and I'm dipping it into my brighter colors now. And sometimes the darker colors. Sometimes you want to add a layer of darker color first, or sometimes you want to add a highlight on top. So if you want to add sort of a layer of darker bushes underneath first, and then you can add some details to those, dip it into your black and your blue, maybe a little bit of green in there, just those lower colors. And you'll see you get a darker color, a darker bush, but with a little bit of highlight in it. Notice I'm sliding it up. I'm sliding it up from the bottom, and what that does is it creates a lot of darker color on the bottom part of my tool, but it adds the brighter color right to the tippy top, and that gives me some very nice 3D sort of shape if you slide that tool up into your paint. And once you've applied enough darker colors, you might want to add just highlights. So we're just going to dip it right into the highlight color. And notice the pretty fringy edge that you get. Now I'm being careful about how I dip it. I'm not just dipping it willy-nilly. Each tool is going to be different, so you need to sort of control that tool with your fingers a little bit, be a little bit wise about how you dip it. And it might take a few layers of highlights and shadows to create, some really beautiful looking bushes. It's not automatic, but it's almost automatic. And you can see if you hold that tool in a special way, you get kind of a little semicircle. If you just hold it and smush it down, you might get something nice, but you might not. But if you make sure that you're holding that tool in such a way that you create little semicircles, that's when you're able to add these beautiful little highlights. And it might be a tiny little one. There might be only a tiny little bit of paint on it, but those tiny little highlights in the semicircle just add a lot of flavor, because nature's like that. There are big highlights, there are small highlights. The thing is that the highlights look like the fringe on the paper, and that they have a little bit of a semicircle shape. And you can always add a little bit of light and shadow if you have good transparent colors. Again, Molotov is a wonderful transparent color brand. The fluorescent colors are transparent in Montana, Water-Based 300. Whatever you're using, make sure that there's some kind of paint that you can see through that you can use as just a little accent. I've added a little bit of green in areas where I want more light, and a little bit of that shadowy blue where I want it to look more in shadow. And that's a wonderful tool to have. So you can just tear off a piece of poster board as well. You can make some beautiful little highlights with just a torn piece of poster board. You don't need to use only one tool. In fact, you should experiment with using one or two or even three different tools on your paintings, or as many as you want. In this case, I've got just a torn edge of a piece of poster board, the same stuff I'm painting on. I'm dipping it into some of my highlight colors, my greens and my blues, which have kind of pooled and dried a little bit so they're nice and sharp. And I'm just adding in a few little bright highlights, maybe little vines hanging down, little plants, I don't know, but just little sharp areas, which are a little bit of a different texture, because in nature it's like that. There are different textures everywhere. And especially in some of the darker areas, some of those brighter plants might be just popping out. And then all we need is just a little bit more fog at the bottom of our waterfalls, because remember, there's going to be all this vapor from the falling water. It's going to be covering some of the plants. And then we've got a beautiful painting. But we can add a little bit more detail even. Maybe some of those plants, as they get closer to us, have a little bit of orange in them, because they're a little bit warmer. So I'll just dip into a little bit of that orange and green, and I'll just add a little bit of extra detail coming towards the viewer. It just warms it up a little bit, and that's a very simple way of just doing a final touch. Plants that are closer to the viewer might have just a tiny little bit of warmth, or orange or yellow in them in this case. And I'll add a sun in just a very easy way by spraying through a CD with a little bit of white, and that adds some volume. And take a look at your painting. Anywhere you think it needs just that little extra touch of love, you can add that. Maybe a little shadow with blue, whatever you want to add. Just get it perfect the way you like it. And enjoy using these wonderful new tools to create things that people can't imagine that you painted with newspaper and spray paint or acrylic paint or whatever you like to use. I hope you've enjoyed learning about these tools, and show me what you come up with. Ciao.